to another episode of Agency Leadership Live. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, and today we're going to be talking about career paths, and particularly whether you are an agency owner or freelancer today or you're an employee somewhere, you may be thinking about making a change and adjusting your career path. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're in the middle of a recession, we're in the middle of all sorts of chaos. So why not take the time to think about if the current path you are on is the one that you want to remain on? And this is a topic that I end up discussing with a lot of agency owners. And in fact, I had a conversation recently with an agency owner who was contemplating perhaps following a different path and getting out of agency ownership. And that's perfectly understandable. So let's, over the next bit here, let's talk about some of the things that you should be thinking about as you figure out which your own solution, which the best solution is for you going forward. So let's go ahead and jump into the topic. And I think the first thing that we need to think about here is that the grass is always greener. It always seems like if you're an owner, geez, wouldn't it just be better to be an employee and not have to worry about all of these things that I have to deal with? Or if you're an employee, you can say, hey, if I were only the boss, I could make all the decisions and then I would be able to follow my own choices and not have to worry about disagreeing with my current employer about the direction that we're going. And so you do have to remember that the grass is always greener. There are challenges no matter what you're doing. And of course, if you've been on a particular path for a long period of time, change can be very daunting. If you've never owned a business, the thought of starting your own business can be pretty intimidating. And frankly, it should be, because it is a lot of responsibility and a lot of effort to have your own agency. At the same time, if you've been an agency owner for any period of time or you've been a freelancer working remotely, the notion of taking on a regular full-time job can be also intimidating, because you lose some of the flexibility, or at least you feel that you're losing flexibility in that. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So I really thought it was important to give that caveat about understanding that the grass does always seem greener on the other side. And so you should understand that as you're making your own evaluation. And if you have questions or thoughts of your own, feel free to drop a comment if you're watching this live, or leave a comment if you're watching this as a recording, and I will be sure to respond. So the first thing you need to think about is control. And obviously, as an owner of a business, you have the sense of having a lot of control. And you certainly do get to make a lot of decisions. Frankly, you have to make a lot of decisions. So I guess you could see that as a pro or a con. But you do have the ability to decide what kinds of projects you're going to take on. You have the ability to decide which clients you're going to work for. And of course, as an employee, that's not something that you have the ability to choose. As a freelancer, you end up somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit more challenging to truly pick and choose, honestly, as a freelancer, because it's you have to fill um, your day with as much work as you can, and so sometimes as a freelancer and also as an agency owner, you end up taking on things that you might otherwise prefer not to, just to make ends meet. But you do have that control over those kinds of things, and you have control over the direction that you're taking. So you can make adjustments to the kinds of services you're providing. Whereas if you're an employee, you're going to end up having to do whatever your employer has put you into that box. And so that if they think of you as a writer or a content producer or a video producer or a web designer or whatever, there's going to be a tendency for them to think of you that way and give you those kinds of projects. So as an owner, and to a lesser degree as a freelancer, you have the ability to strike out in different directions. So having that control can certainly be appealing and is something to think about. On the flip side, as an employee, you really do have more control than you think you do, because you have the ability to communicate with your employer about your skills and interests. And one of the mistakes that I often see employees make, sometimes employees that I've had, and honestly, sometimes I've made it as an employee myself years ago, was not being clear with my supervisor about the kinds of work that I wanted to do and what I could be doing. And so you really need to have those lines of communication as an employee. And if you do, you often have more control than you think. And we're seeing an increasing number of agency employees who are getting more influence over the kinds of clients that their agencies take on. We've seen this even prior to the last few months. We've seen employees band together and say to their employers, no, this is not the kind of project that we want to take on. This is not the kind of business that we want to work for. And so as employees, you may have more control than you think. All right, next, compensation. Obviously, as an employee, you tend to have a fairly fixed compensation structure. And so that's nice and predictable from a cash flow perspective. It can be very helpful if you're doing things like buying a house or those kinds of things because you can easily prove your income to a bank. On the other side of things, if you are a freelancer or an agency owner, you have more ability to go out and find ways to augment your income and to increase how much you're taking home because you get to eat what you kill. And so the more business that you generate for your agency, as long as you're pricing it properly, and we talked about that not too long ago, if you're pricing it properly, you should be increasing profits and putting more money in your pocket. It's much easier to do that as an agency owner or as a freelancer than it is as an employee, where you tend to be dependent upon bonuses. On the other hand, because most of what we're talking about today is going to be on the one hand, on the other hand, as an employee, many agency employees are out there taking on sideline projects and freelance work in addition to their day job. Now, you need to make sure that you are clearing this with your employer and making sure that you're abiding by whatever policies there may be. You certainly don't want to be taking on projects and work that is competitive to your agency, but it is increasingly likely that agency employees will be taking on some outside projects. And so you do have some ability to supplement your income, but really if you're looking to maximize your compensation, you're going to have a much better chance of doing that if you are an agency owner or a freelancer. Now, between agency owner and freelancer, the problem is you are basically selling your own time, and so there are limits on that. Whereas an agency owner, you can go out there and multiply your success by having team members, whether that's contractors or employees. So something to think about there. Now, obviously, there's a lot more risk to your compensation on the owner side or the freelancer side, because if just as you get to pocket as much money as you can, you also have to suffer through any downturns, and many agency owners are experiencing that now, and that may be why you are watching this video, because perhaps you are running an agency or you're a freelancer and you've seen your income dip in the recent months as we've gone through all of this turmoil. And so perhaps you're wondering if that's the path you want to remain on. So compensation is something very important to think about. Overall flexibility. So we're seeing as more workers are working remotely, employees have more flexibility than ever before. Agencies and companies are giving employees greater flexibility over their schedules, particularly as many of you may have childcare concerns and maybe you're splitting duties with a spouse or significant other in taking care of children during the day. And so maybe you're working in the morning and spouse is taking care of the kids, and then you flip in the afternoon. There's a lot of flexibility that employees have today, but still you don't have nearly as much flexibility as when you own the business. Now, part of that is perceived flexibility, right? Because flexibility is a great thing, but at the same time, you are beholden to your clients. So whether you're an agency owner or a freelancer, you still have to be accountable to them. And if they say, we need you on a call at 1 p.m., or we need you to be on a video conference at 10 a.m., you're probably going to have to be there. And so while you perceive that flexibility as an agency owner, and you do have it because you do get to control things a bit more than you can as an employee, it's not complete flexibility. And so you have to be careful that you don't overestimate the value of that flexibility. So let's take a look at the next issue on the list, and this is role. And this is one of the things that I love about being a business owner, and I've loved for the last 20 years of owning my own businesses, and that is that I get to some degree at least, choose the role that I fill, and I can adjust it over time. I am just a restless individual, and I like to try a lot of different things. I want to learn a lot. I like to dabble in different things, and as an owner, you have the ability to make some of those choices, whereas an employee, you have to convince your boss that that's a good idea and that you really should be pursuing those paths. So that's something to think about. The role that you give yourself is different if you are an owner versus an employee. At the same time, there are things, particularly as an owner, and this is less so as a freelancer, because as a freelancer you can specialize and choose what you do. But as an owner, there's a lot of roles that you have to take on because there's nobody else to do it. And perhaps in the early days, that means that you have to be the bookkeeper and the custodial worker and the administrative support and so on and so on. There's all sorts of things that you may have to do as an owner of a small business, of a small agency, that you wouldn't have to touch as an employee. So, yes, you get to choose some of the roles that you take on. At the same time, some of them are forced upon you because that's simply the role of a small business owner, of an entrepreneur. So, next up, responsibility. And a lot of these things come back to that issue. And this is one of the ones where there's a brighter line between freelancer and agency owner. Okay. So one of the things you have to think about from a responsibility standpoint is that as a business owner, you have responsibility not just for yourself, but for your team. And that can be contractors or employees. It's a responsibility to your clients. For example, if you've got clients, it's very difficult for you to say, 2 weeks notice, I'm just going to go off and do something else. So if you are one of those agency owners right now who's wondering if being a business owner is really right for you and you're thinking maybe I'll go become an employee, you need to think about a longer runway for your clients. So you have that responsibility that is magnified beyond what you would have as a freelancer, where typically most of your contracts would be 30 days notice at most. And you can more easily get out of them. And of course, as an employee, typically you can give 2 weeks notice, or in some cases even less, but please do at least 2 weeks if you're an employee. It's the right thing to do. And so if you're in that position, your responsibility is less to people outside of yourself and your own family unit. So responsibility changes quite substantially between these three different choices. And you need to make sure that you are comfortable with the level of responsibility that comes with it. And that fits into the next item, which is stability. So, along with that responsibility comes the question of stability. And that means that as a business owner, you're much more likely to see fluctuations up and down in your business and having to make changes to your team structure or your business structure to accommodate it. Whereas as an employee, you tend to be more stable, although we're seeing obviously in times like these, there's no such thing as true stability. And even companies and organizations that seem like they're rock solid, they can be having challenges right now, and that may be carrying over to the ability to maintain employment for everybody. So, there are two extremes there when it comes to stability. And as a freelancer, again, somewhere in the middle, it's sort of that middle ground where you have some additional stability, because you're not worried about having to spread that pie out over more people and a broader team and a larger cost base. But at the same time, it's not quite as stable as full-time employment. And then this also takes us to the final issue that I wanted to raise for you to think about as you're considering these different career paths, and that is satisfaction. And satisfaction is deeply tied into stress. Each of these different roles carries with it different levels of risk, which equals different levels of stress, but ultimately the level of satisfaction may overwhelm any sense of stress or risk. So you need to look at this. And this is really going to come down to you as an individual and what your personality type is, what you thrive on. For me, I've been an entrepreneur for so long, it's in my blood that I want to be out there and trying new things and figuring out how I can innovate and grow a business. That may not be what drives you. You may just be driven by doing great client service work. And if your focus is doing great client service work, doing creative work, then being an employee may be better, because then you're not having to take on all of the financial responsibilities, all of the sales and marketing responsibilities, and all of the risk that comes with building a business. On the other hand, if you want a little taste of that, perhaps, some degree of that control and risk and those sorts of things, but maybe not to the same level as actually building up a team, well, then a freelancer role might be the right choice for you, because you can choose to remain solo, not have contractors, not have employees, and instead pursue things that are within your desire to pursue creative and client service goals, with only just a touch of the sales piece that you would have to take on if you built a full-fledged agency business. So, as you see from this discussion, there are a lot of different things that you need to think about as you're contemplating your own career path. It's worth taking the time right now to think about how has your perspective changed in the last 6 months? How have your own circumstances changed, and how does that feed in to these different elements of consideration that you need to have as you're figuring out what that best path forward is? So hopefully I've given you some good food for thought today on this and given you a chance to start thinking about some of these issues. If you have questions about it and you'd like to reach out, feel free to just email me at chip@agencyleadership.com. I'd be happy to talk it through with you. It's something that I enjoy doing, brainstorming what the best fit is for individuals. So I'd love to have that conversation. Of course, if you are interested in more of our videos, you can visit agencyleadership.tv. We also have lots of resources on the Agency Leadership website. You can join our Agency Leadership Council for free and have access to sample documents, templates, workbooks, and all sorts of other useful things. And of course, if you have questions that you'd like to see me address on a future Agency Leadership Live, go ahead and drop that in an email to me, or you can use the Ask Chip function on the Agency Leadership website. And so with that, that will bring today's live stream to a close. I'll be back with you on Friday to do Q&A. So if you have questions, I may be able to touch on it as soon as this Friday at noon Eastern Time on YouTube and Facebook. So I look forward to that conversation, and have a great week, everybody.